I think making friends as an adult is actually one of the hardest parts of life, and no one really talks about it. Yesterday, I went to my usual morning Pilates class, and for the first time in a really long time, this girl who, seemed super cool complimented me on my outfit. And I had this split second moment where I wanted to be like, thank you. Do you want to be friends? But instead, I just said thank you, and that was kind of it. And to put into perspective, how big of a deal that is, I go to Pilates 5 times a week. I see the same people, I recognize their faces. Sometimes I'll smile, I'll say hello, but everyone is usually in this very specific mood of I just woke up, I have things to do, I'm keeping to myself. And it's almost never reciprocated. And in my experience, I feel like this is very specific to New York. People are much more chatty to me in LA or in Chicago if I'm visiting and I go to a Pilates class. But anyway, it made me realize that it's actually really hard to go from being a friendly stranger to being someone's friend. Like, there's no clear step between saying hello and complimenting someone to exchanging numbers and getting coffee with them. And it didn't used to be this way. Complimenting someone in class when I was younger was the easiest way to make a friend. You'd literally be like, "Oh, I like your shoes," and suddenly you're sitting together at lunch for the rest of the year. I feel like from kindergarten through college, everyone is kind of just actively looking for friends. And sure, it does get a little more nuanced in college than in middle school. But even then, for me at least, it felt so much easier than it does now. And I've really been trying to figure out why that is. I think part of it is just proximity. When you're younger, you're seeing the same people all the time. You sit next to the same people in class. You're in the same activities. You're kind of just built into each other's lives. And you also live close to each other. Everyone in your elementary school lives in the same area. In college, everyone is either on campus or maybe a 5-minute walk away. So friendships don't really require that much effort. They just kind of happen over time. And I also think when you're younger, there's this underlying desire to fit in. You want to be included. You want to get invited to things. You want to feel like you belong. So you naturally put in more effort to connect with people. And also, your options are kind of limited. Like, the pool of people you can be friends with is finite, so you kind of have to make it work. Whereas as an adult, it's the complete opposite. People aren't built into your life the same way, especially if you move to a big city, which is what I did. I grew up in Evanston, which isn't small, but it's nothing like Manhattan. And when you move somewhere like New York, suddenly you're going to be surrounded by millions of people. And I almost feel like that creates this weird mindset of, I don't really have to try that hard. There are endless options. There are hypothetically so many people to be friends with. And then on top of that, everyone is just in completely different life phases. Some people are super focused on their careers. Some people are getting married or having kids. Some people are just here temporarily and not really looking to build deep friendships. So it's not just about meeting people, it's about finding people who are aligned with where you are in your life. And I think when you combine all of that, less proximity, more options, different priorities, and just being more selective as we get older, it makes friendship feel a lot less natural and a lot more intentional. And that shift has forced me to get really honest with myself about what I actually want in friendships. Because when it doesn't happen naturally, you kind of have to ask yourself, what am I looking for? And for me, I think I've realized I would much rather have a small group of close friends that I genuinely love spending time with over a bigger group of more casual, like going out friends. Like on the surface, sure. It's girls in their late 20s, early 30s that are also living in the city who want to do fun things, like trying new restaurants, going to cute cafes, going on walks, maybe shopping, um, maybe something creative like drawing or cooking or playing board games. But I think on a deeper level, what I actually miss is having friends I can just call and be like, what are you doing? And we end up sitting on the couch together for hours just talking about nothing. It doesn't always have to be like a whole plan or a structured activity. I miss having people I can just kind of like exist next to, and somehow that ends up being like really fun and we just have our own adventure. But I think the reason that kind of friendship is so hard to find is because there are actually levels you have to go through to get there. It doesn't just happen overnight. When you first meet someone and have a good interaction, they're basically just an acquaintance. You're like, "Oh, they seem really nice." And then maybe over time, if you see them again or you make plans, they become more of like a casual friend. Someone you enjoy spending time with, you have fun together, you might go to dinner or do things. But that still doesn't mean they're someone you can just call and be like, come over and sit on my couch. And I feel like that level, the close friend level, only comes after time and consistency and actually building trust with someone. And you really only get there if you're actually aligned in what you want out of a friendship. So I've definitely become a lot more aware of what I look for in a close friend and also like what turns me off. I feel like those two things kind of go hand in hand. One of the biggest things for me is just kindness, which sounds very basic, but I actually think it shows up in a lot of ways. Like, I really pay attention to how someone treats people around them. Are they kind to servers? Do they hold the door open? Do they give up their seat on the train if there's someone that really needs it? Little things like that tell you a lot about someone. And obviously, I also care a lot about how someone is kind towards me. I've met people whose, like, whole sense of humor is just making sarcastic comments or taking little jabs at people. And I just don't find that funny. Like, being mean is not cute. Another big thing for me is authenticity. I really value people who are secure in themselves. People who have, like, their own beliefs and aren't afraid to have a personality outside of the group. Because if you think about it, if you're just agreeing with everything that everyone says, or if you're just doing whatever everyone else is doing just to fit in, then you're not really bringing anything that's like you to the table. And I've definitely met people like that who will echo whatever's being said in the moment, even if it contradicts something that they echoed earlier. And over time, I've realized that it's really hard to trust people who don't actually show you who they are. And I don't even think like it's always intentional. Perhaps sometimes people learn to be like overly agreeable as a way to avoid conflict, or because they grew up in environments where fitting in felt really important to them. But if you haven't taken the time to figure out who you are, it creates a lot of room for miscommunication, for jealousy, and sometimes This kind of subtle competitive energy that just doesn't really feel good to be around. When I first moved to New York, I lived with two roommates that I didn't know very well before moving in. Let's call them Haley and Nancy. And pretty quickly, I started to notice that Haley was like very insecure, which was confusing because by conventional societal standards, she was very attractive. But one day, we were just sitting in the living room, not even like really talking, and out of nowhere, she turns to me and she goes, "Sometimes I feel really bad for Nancy." And I'm thinking like, "Oh, okay, like I'm worried something must be going on with Nancy." So I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, Nancy is not as good looking as us, so it must be hard for her when we go out and guys don't really talk to her." And I was just like, honestly shocked. Like, mouth fully open, shocked. Who says that? And how am I supposed to even respond to something like that? And after a minute, I was just like, I don't know. I think beauty is subjective, and that's a really weird thing to say. And she kind of just like brushed it off. Like, yeah, but you know what I mean. And I was like, I actually don't, and this is making me uncomfy. And that moment just stuck with me because it wasn't even just about what she said, it was what it revealed. There was this underlying insecurity and comparison happening all the time with her. And I started noticing it like in other ways too. She would literally copy things that I wore and then act weirdly defensive if I pointed it out. Like if I was just like, "Hey, like twins, we're wearing the same thing, you have good taste," etc., she would get super defensive. It just created this really uncomfortable dynamic where I felt like I never really knew where she stood or how she actually felt. And I think that's what it comes down to. If someone doesn't really know who they are yet, it's very hard for them to show up as a good, consistent friend. At that point, you're not really even like interacting with a grounded person. You're interacting with whatever version of them feels safest in that moment. And I also want to point out that authenticity isn't something that's fixed. Like, I'm still figuring myself out. My opinions will change, my preferences will evolve as I learn more, and that's normal. But at this point, I feel like on a base level, I have a pretty strong sense of who I am, what I value, and what feels right to me. So I want to be around people who have that same like sense of self, even if it looks different from mine. The third thing I look for is reciprocity. I think good friendships require mutual respect, mutual effort, and a willingness to sometimes be a little inconvenienced for each other. Because you can't build something deeper if you're only going to be there for the easy, fun moments. Like a casual hang is nice, but that's not really what creates trust. What creates trust is showing up, calling your friend just to hear their voice, being there for the important moments, actually caring, and making that care visible. And I keep seeing this idea online of like low effort friendships, and I am honestly over it. I am so sick of it. I'm not saying you need to be available 24/7 or you need to respond to your friend's text within 3 minutes. But there's a difference between having boundaries and just not showing up for your friend. Like, I know people who take 10 days to respond to a text, but then when you're with them, they're on their phone the whole time. Or people who cancel on something important, like a birthday, last minute because they're just like not feeling social. It's like the whole point of a close friendship is that you show up for each other. Sometimes you do have to be a little inconvenienced, and that's not a bad thing. That's part of building something that's real. Although balance is important, the relationship shouldn't feel transactional. Like, my closest friends and I are not keeping a scoreboard of who called last and who paid for this and who paid for that. Like, some weeks it's going to be 40-60, other weeks it's going to be 70-30. But over time, it evens out. You just trust that the other person will show up for you when it matters. Even with small things, for example, like paying for coffee, it's really not that serious. I cannot stand when I pay for someone's coffee like 5 times in a row and then they Venmo request me like $4.57 for a coffee. Maybe it's cultural, but growing up in a Syrian American household, we would like literally fight over the bill when going out with friends. There was pride in being generous, and I really like that mindset. To me, it says, I want to show up for you, not because I have to, but because I care about you. And the last thing I want to mention is just bringing good energy. I want to be friends with people who have like a joie de vivre, like a genuine excitement for being alive. And that doesn't mean everything is perfect all the time. It just means you're engaged with your life. You're the main character of your life. I don't want to be around people who are constantly negative or who move through life feeling kind of checked out, like they're just waiting for the week to be over so they can have like one good moment on a Friday night. For me, I feel like I always have a running list of things I'm like really looking forward to. It can be big things like places I want to travel or like new restaurants I want to try, but it can also be the small things like making a cup of coffee in the morning and drinking it outside in the sunlight, or going for a walk by the river, or honestly just sitting down and eating a really good plate of pasta. And I know that not everyone is dealt the same cards in life. Like, that's real. There will always be people who have more or have it easier in certain ways. But I also don't think that we're just products of our circumstances. I think we have a say in how we move through life. And part of that is choosing to notice and enjoy the small moments. We've all felt the difference when someone walks into a room and they bring this like light magnetic energy versus when someone kind of drains the room. And I think I've realized I want to be the kind of person who brings the good energy. And I also want to surround myself with people who are genuinely excited to be here. And of course, that does not mean that we don't have bad days. I'll always be there for my friends if they're going through something or they need to vent or they're just like not feeling okay. But there's a difference between having hard moments and choosing to live in like a constant state of negativity, like making it your complete identity. And I just don't have space for that anymore. So, to summarize, I look for friends that are kind, they're authentic, they're willing to build a balanced relationship, and they bring good energy. So, I guess the question is, how do you actually make friends as an adult? Clearly, I don't have it figured out, but there are a few things I've noticed that can help. I think the first thing is just accepting that it is going to feel a little awkward. It's honestly kind of like dating. There is such a thing as like friendship chemistry. You do have to risk rejection, and it can feel slightly embarrassing to ask for someone's number. You have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit. Like with that girl in Pilates that I mentioned earlier, the difference between us staying strangers and becoming friends was literally just one more step. I could have kept the conversation going, maybe asked her a follow-up question, and then said something like, we should grab coffee after class sometime. And I think more often than not, people do want to make friends. They are just as hesitant as you are to take the next step. And I know it's scary. Rejection in any form is hard. But with friendships, it feels especially personal. If someone doesn't want to date me, I can just tell myself, okay, I'm just not their type and move on. But with friendships, I will sometimes spiral a little bit. I'll start replaying things in my head and asking myself questions like, was I interesting enough? Did I say the right things? Did I actually show them who I am? And it can easily turn into this whole like, why didn't they like me situation that's way too easy to overanalyze. And I think it gets even harder when there are mutual friends involved, because then it's not just someone I met once that I can kind of like put out of my head. I can actually see this potential friend hanging out with our mutual friends, like on social media, or I might just casually hear about it through mutual friends. And then it's easy for me to think, okay, so it's not just that they're busy, they just didn't choose me. Not feeling as not great, it's definitely crummy. But I've been trying to remind myself that friendship requires both chemistry and timing. And sometimes if someone doesn't choose you as their friend, it's really not that deep. Maybe you just didn't spend enough time together. Maybe you don't have that much in common. Maybe they're overwhelmed, or they already have a full social circle, or just aren't in a place where they're looking to build something new. And I think the biggest thing I'm learning is that not everyone I meet is meant to be my close friend. And that's not a reflection of my value, it's just reality. All I can do is show up as my best self, put in the effort, and trust that the right people are gonna meet me there. I also think consistency matters way more than having big, exciting plans. If you see someone regularly for small, like low stake hangouts, it builds familiarity. And that's what actually creates connection. It kind of mimics the proximity thing we had growing up, where friendships just happened because you saw the same people all of the time. Like, I'm way more likely to say yes to grabbing coffee nearby than committing to a big plan like a concert, especially in the early stages of a friendship. People like their comfort zones. So if you invite someone into something that they're already doing, like a workout class, a walk, or coffee, it's just way easier to say yes. And you also have to put yourself in places where friendships are even possible. Places like workout classes, hobby groups, small gatherings hosted through like mutual friends. You can't really build friendships if you never see the same people twice. And personally, I've found that I connect with people way more if we have like a shared activity rather than just meeting on a random night out. Like, I've had so many nice conversations with girls at bars or at clubs, but they rarely turn into these like close friendships outside of that setting. And I think you also have to be the kind of person that you want to be friends with. I want to come across as warm, open, and inviting, so I try to show up that way in social situations. I think about how often I reach out to my friends, how present I am in conversations, whether I'm actually like listening and showing curiosity. So there's no perfect formula. It's really trial and error until you find your tribe. Anyway, that's all I had for today. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know if any of this resonated or if you have tips on making friends as an adult, because clearly we are all still figuring it out. I'm Dina. This is Casually Thriving.